Hey, you guys, this is the Couplings Fire podcast. Here's a couple of things you might need to know, or maybe you just forgot. I'm Taylor, a volunteer firefighter and also a firewife to my favorite firefighter. Join me as I talk anything and everything fire related. I don't claim to be an expert, I just love to talk fire, and everything I say is my own opinion. My goal? To inspire anyone listening to take the steps to bettering their department, however they can. Let's get on to the episode. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Couplings Fire podcast. I have a very exciting guest on today. I've been trying to get him on for a while, and finally the stars aligned and the schedules aligned to be able to work it out. So I have David Mellen. He is a 23-year student of the fire service and has been a paramedic for 16 years. David currently serves as a captain with the Reno Township Fire Department, and he is a returning instructor at FDIC, Firehouse Expo, and several other state and local fire schools, as well as the owner of Valor Fire Training. And I'm going to do a subtle, not so subtle plug that one of those fire schools is Les Lukert. So
yes, it is. Yes, it is.
But more importantly, what I'm more excited about is because David was so I listened to podcasts, a couple of podcasts to kind of start getting me out into the world of the fire service to want to search for trainings, right? But David, going to your class at Les Lukert that first year, you were the one who actually got me to stay in it and to go even farther, which is crazy. It's funny how that happened, and just the fates aligned or something, because that was a weird weekend. It was a great weekend, but it was a weird weekend.
It was. And if I remember right, like you weren't even going to be in the class. Like you weren't planning on being in our class. And then at the last minute, you kind of jumped in.
Exactly. So we'll get into that here in a little bit, I guess. But so I'm just more excited to have you in, just because I don't know. It was such a pivotal part of the beginnings of the, for lack of better words, not the real part of my fire service career, but almost, because when I finally started actually getting into things and not just going through the motions.
Yeah, no, and you and I have talked extensively about this. And for the listeners, I mean, as an instructor, when you came back after 6 or 7 months, and I had the opportunity to talk to you, and I didn't realize at the time how much impact we were going to have on you, and then to hear your story and find out kind of the backstory of what happened, and I was like, oh wow, and as an instructor, it was awesome just to hear that we were able to have that much impact on your career and on your path, and it was heartwarming, but it was also like one of the biggest pats on the back that you can ask for as an instructor.
No, but I bet it's something that instructors don't expect to hear. They just think they're, not always, but think they're just going to go teach in their class and maybe help somebody a little bit or whatever they go through, not necessarily, have that big pivotal moment for somebody or whatever. So
yeah. And so you bring up a really good point. Like, and I was just talking about this when I was in Georgia at the Bearers of the Oath conference. Every class, at the end of every scenario or every section, and then at the end of the day, as an instructor, the one thing that I've always done, and I got this from other instructors that I learned from, I'll just ask for a show of hands, like who here learned one thing that they didn't know when they walked in the door. And as long as everybody's putting their hands up, we know we're on the right track. We know that we're teaching them something that they didn't know. And that's kind of how we gauge our classes. If we need to alter something or change something, then we make sure we're doing it. So we're not just teaching something that somebody already knows. We want to teach things that they haven't seen, or a way to do it that they haven't seen. But yeah, I mean, that's like my gold standard. That's what makes my heart feel warm, because we don't get that feedback all the time. Every once in a while we get, stories like, hey, you taught us this, we used it on a fire and it worked. North Platte is a great example. We did a search class, and then they actually pulled a victim out of a house using some of the search methods that we taught. And so that was cool. But yeah, you are by far, hands down, the one that has been probably the most vocal about how much we impacted you, and we love it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love telling your story, and
not like, oh my gosh, shut up, you talked too much today.
No, I love telling your story because it's such a funny story, and it's just such a it just has such a great message.
So the first year of me going to Les Lukert, it really had a big impact on me. And really kept me going back to other conferences, wanting to search out other things, and keep going back to that conference, and has grown me really into the type of firefighter I am today. So you've attended trainings a lot, both teaching and I'm assuming as a student as well. In your opinion, I guess, how can these small trainings or regional conferences influence who you are as a firefighter?
So it's a great question. When you break down the training sources, obviously you have your in-department stuff, that's hosted locally within an organization or even kind of like a mutual aid setup. And then you have your micro conferences, some of the smaller conferences, and then you have your national level conferences that are held around the country. And so they're all different and they all offer things and have their pros and cons. The smaller conferences like you're talking about with Les Luker and some of the other ones, it really, as a student, I think it gives you more exposure to the instructor. There's usually smaller class sizes. The information, you can have the opportunity to talk to the instructor and ask questions that you might not be able to do when there's 50 or 60 students all taking one class and they're just running reps over and over and over again. There's not time to sit there and go, well, hey, wait a second, I don't understand this, or can you explain this a different way because I didn't understand it. And that's what I love about like Les Luker. The class sizes are 15 to 20, somewhere in there. And we have 2 days to actually go through and discuss and talk and kind of refine things so that the student understands it, because the way that I explain it to you might not make sense to the person sitting next to you. So I like the intimacy of it, not to sound awkward, but I mean, it's just that intimacy of, being able to connect with those students and spend quality time with them, making sure that they understand the material that you're putting out instead of just, here's how you throw a ladder, show them 2 or 3 times and then have them do it 3 or 4 times. And then they move on to the next station.
I mean, there are definitely benefits to both ways of doing it, because sometimes you do just need the quick reps and going on to the next station doing those things. But especially if you're either working with somebody who's new or learns differently, who hasn't been taught properly in the past, or you want to more refine certain techniques instead of just have them do reps of it, you do need more of that one-on-one time, or at least 1-to-3 ratio kind of time.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's, I mean, we love teaching at all of them. We love going to departments and hosting an in-house class. We love going to the micro conferences and we love going to the national level conferences. It's not, one is not better than the other. It's just a different application of the knowledge and the lesson when you go to different places.
I haven't made it to one of the big ones yet. I will someday.
Yeah, you have
to make sure that the stars align for that one too, because oh my goodness.
Absolutely. Well, and I tell this story to everybody. The first year that I got to go to FDIC was the first year that I taught. And the only reason why I was able to go financially was because I was instructing. And so, one of the perks of going there is that they cover your travel and they cover your hotel. And the amount of stuff that I was able to learn and sit in on classes, I mean, it really is just like the Disneyland of fire conferences. I got to see stuff that I hadn't seen before. I was super excited. I got to listen to instructors that I wanted to sit in their class my entire career. And so I tell everybody, if there is a way, I mean, there's scholarships that you can put in for, there are vendors who will sponsor somebody to go. There's a lot of ways that people can get to some of those bigger conferences. And at some point in your career, I think everybody should be afforded the opportunity to go.
Yeah, I'm excited. Someday that will happen. I'll just have to start scouring the internet for some of those resources and find them out there. So what got you started going to these conferences in the first place? Did you go on your own first as an attendee, or did you first start going to these conferences as an instructor in general?
So it's going to come full circle, right? So the first fire conference that I ever attended was Les Luker. And yeah, it was actually the first fire conference that I ever went to. I was an explorer.
You remember what year?
Oh, God, it was probably like 1990, 1998, 1999.
Okay.
So I was an explorer in Lincoln, and there was I heard about this fire conference. Everybody was talking about it. And I'm like, man, that would be really cool. I'd love to go to that. And so I talked to a couple of the people around Lincoln, and they were like, well, yeah, if you want to go. And I honestly, I feel horrible. I can't remember who took me. I don't remember how I got there.
You're also kind of young if you were an explorer, though. So.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I went with other people. I mean, I rode there with other people, but we ended up going and I sat in on a rapid intervention class. And this is back when RIT was like a huge thing and it was new and cool. And everybody was like, ooh, 2 in, 2 out RIT teams. And I was just like, oh man. And so that was the first time that I'd heard the Denver story with Longren and, the Brett Tarver story from Phoenix. And so I think it was the first time that I was kind of exposed to going to a fire conference. And then I got to see like the social aspect. And obviously I wasn't old enough to drink or anything like that. But I mean, I got to see firefighters all hanging out with each other and drinking and talking shop. And so it set the tone for what I wanted to do with the future of my career. And I was like, man, I would love to be able to not only go to these conferences, but eventually I want to be the person standing up there in the front of the class teaching. And, that was at a very, very young age. So it kind of set the bar for what I wanted to do in the future. And from there, I mean, I just started picking up whatever conferences I could go to, whether they were local or like once I moved down to Kansas City, there's one down here called SCAFA, which is the Kansas. Yeah. And so, I went out there and took some classes and they've had some, and then the Fools started coming about. And so now there's Fools conferences that I've gone to. And then obviously morphed into being an instructor, which opens up all the doors to be able to go to these things. But the one big thing that I always touch on, you and I have had these conversations, it doesn't matter if I go and I teach at a conference or I go as a student, I always take classes. So it doesn't matter. I mean, even if I go teach at a conference, if the most I can do is sit in for a couple hours here and there on a conference class, I'll do it, because to me, it's doing a disservice. I mean, I'm not going to sit in my hotel room and, play around on social media when I could be sitting in a class learning from somebody.
Always learning, never done with it. I mean, you can learn from everybody, even if, I don't know, everyone has a different perspective. And even if you don't necessarily like who else is teaching at the conference, depending or whatever, you can still learn something from them, or it gets you to think about something else differently. Pop something in your head. So
absolutely. And we learn from students all the time. I mean, that's not a new thing. I mean, we learn just as much from the students sometimes as they learn from us as instructors. So it's nice to be able to sit there. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I've sat in on classes where I'm like, ooh, that was not great. But
it solidified your thought of your own train of thought that fits better.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, the methodology in which they're presenting the information might not be your style. The information itself, I've sat in on classes where I'm like, oh, those statistics aren't right, but okay. But again, it's those things that you go and you learn, and even if you didn't like it or it wasn't the right information, that gives you a starting point to say, okay, I'm seeing where they're going kind of off the beaten path with this information. Now I'm going to go do my own research. And when I look at it, I'm like, okay, well, they were close, but here's the data and this is why. So I'm still learning stuff, even if they put out, incorrect data, or, maybe they say something wrong. It just kind of perks you up and you're like, well, maybe I should go back and review that. Maybe I didn't understand it right.
And maybe I should rephrase this. So I didn't mean to make it sound like there's a ton of instructors that don't know what they're talking about or something. That's not what I meant to say.
No.
I just want to like clarify that for anyone listening. I didn't mean to like go on like there's bunch of bad instructors. No. I did not mean that way. So
no, but I mean, even me and listen, you and I'm an open book, right? Like, in talking to me, there's not a whole lot that I won't hold back. But I mean, I've even gotten called out in classes where as I'm talking about something or I'm using statistics, somebody's in the back on their phone and they're like, hey, actually you're off. And I'm like, really? And then they'll correct me. And I'm like, okay, so I was wrong. And that guy Googled it and he has the right answer. So I'm not above being wrong. And I don't think any instructor is.
Yeah. So you're talking about how you started instructing and everything. So how did you actually start Valor fire training?
Yeah. So back in 2015, we decided to make it official and we came up with a name, and I think there were like 6 different things that we thought of as far as the name and all that. But really it started before that. It was a group of firefighters that I worked with who all really enjoyed teaching. And so we would go around and we would teach classes. Like we had a guy that was really into forcible entry. I was really into like engine work. We had he was a captain at the time, but he's since been promoted to assistant chief. He was real big on command. And so we would just go and teach all these classes. Well, then I say this lovingly, like I love my wife, we're happily married, but I mean, she was getting really upset because we were spending all of our money to pay for hotels and travel and going to all these places to do these classes, and we weren't charging anything. And so she said, hey, if you're going to do this, that's great. I support you 100%, but you really need to make this a business so that, you can use business money and it's separate from ours. And I was like, yeah, no, that sounds great. And so I was like, how do I start a business? And so through the wonders of the fire service, everybody knows something about something.
Isn't that funny?
It
Oh
is.
my goodness.
It is. And so I had a friend of mine who had started a side gig, and he was like, oh man, I got you. And so he kind of walked me through the process and got me set up with everything that we needed. And so that's how Valor Fire Training started. And so since that happened, we have changed kind of the way we do some things. We were never really big at marketing. We've never been, and probably never will be, real big into marketing. We want it to be organic. We want it to be word of mouth. We do have a social media presence, and obviously we do the YouTube and the podcast and all that. But we want people like you who interacted with us to tell people about how we teach. And that's kind of how we want Valor Fire Training to grow. And so, I'd love to be able to pay for ads and pay for commercials and stuff like that, but it's just not, it's really not who we are as instructors, and it doesn't really represent how we are as a company.
Mm-hmm. There's something to be said about word of mouth marketing. Something awesome comes about when the people decide for themselves what they like and decide to share it. And it is 10,000 times more powerful than you putting out an ad out there for somebody else to go to other people and say, hey, here's what I went through. You should get this guy to come in and, train and everything, because it's going to be worth your time. It's rather than them just looking up, okay, what, let's see, fire training in Kansas,
Right.
It's gonna be so different.
Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, since 2015, I've been like, hey, if you liked our class, go leave us a review on Facebook, or go, put something on TikTok. TikTok wasn't a thing back in 2015, but since then, I mean, we try to get people to engage on social media. But at the same time, we're probably the worst profession at doing that. Like, I will have a student that I meet in one of my classes who posts like 8 things on TikTok, but they never tag us. And so I'm like, hey man, those are awesome deals that you sent out, like, of the class. And that's great. But like, can you tag us on it too? And they're like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. So you have to be on top of your social media game as well. But that's how we want it to grow. I mean, we want it to be organic, and nothing against people that do a lot of the marketing stuff, but all of the instructors that I know that I've networked with over the years that I've respected, we all feel the same way. We want it to be organic because we feel like that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think when you start getting into the marketing side, you have to be very careful about how much you do. And it has to feel like your company, like your brand, what you want to put forward. So yeah, where you're not just throwing forward here's another class, here's a highlight reel, here's, whatever, like and share and subscribe and you get this, right. It's great for people who do that. But if places out there want to get into that marketing, you just have to be, sorry, marketing's my thing. I can get very passionate about it. But you just have to be careful about how much you do. It can come off nice and it can come off really sleazy. So you just have to be careful. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, rabbit trail down there too. And we're off of marketing, because otherwise I would talk. We're
going to spend the next 3 hours talking about marketing.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So moving into how I actually met you. So I'll tell a little bit of the backstory of how I got there in the first place. So I was trying to find somewhere to basically get a training in, because I had been listening to a couple different podcasts. I was listening to the Average Jake Firefighter podcast, and I was listening to the Firefighter Training podcast by Pete Lamb. Those were like the first 2 I ever listened to. And they had gotten me kind of riled up a little bit to start getting out there and going to an actual training. So I found one, and this was like a month before the conference started. So like early January. I just happened to randomly see it on Facebook. Go look at the class list, and like it says it's like a training conference or whatever. So I'm like, well, first of all, it's for training instructors, so I probably shouldn't go because I don't know if I qualify. I know I don't qualify, but I'm looking there at my husband. I'm like, you're a training officer. I'll have you go and I'll go too. And then it'll be okay. Right. Smart, sly me trying to, go in under the radar.
Right. You're just tagging along.
Exactly. And then we get signed up for classes, and I'm looking through the descriptions, and I see the class description for your all day Friday class, which at that point was search and rescue under live fire, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, this is fun. I've never really done a lot of search and rescue, and I really haven't done live fire, and I want more live fire training. So let's go do this. And I'm reading through the description. I'm like, sounds a little intense. I took it back and forth to Chris like 3 different times throughout a week before I signed up. I'm like, should I do this? He's like, yeah. A couple days later, should I do this? Yes, sign up. Should I do this? Yes, Taylor, just sign up already. So I went ahead and signed up for it, and some other classroom classes for the rest of the weekend. I wasn't up for a full weekend of hands-on training because, not super into it yet. And Chris was boring. He did just classroom classes the whole time, but
right.
He regrets that now.
Yeah, don't worry about the hot classes. Let's just go sit in the classroom.
Yeah, pretty much. So we get there, and I get to the class. I'm not gonna lie, a little bit freaking out. Everybody in there, I didn't know whether everyone was volunteer career. They all seemed like career to me who were in the class. I'm like, crap. And we sat through the classroom portion, and my brain and heart rate were just out the roof while you're going through all your search stuff. And like, here's all the stuff you need to look for. Like, here's some hazards with it. Here's some statistics and the methyl ethyl bad stuff. I can't tell you how much that phrase is stuck in my brain.
Right.
The stupid little things that happen in there, and we finally go outside, and I'm paired up with Logan. I should not have been paired up with Logan, but we're going through the house, through the fake house and stuff like that. And he's like zooming past me and whatnot.
Right.
Like, well, this is a great pair up. This is going to be perfect. I can't forget when you threw the baby out the window. First of all, I wasn't expecting it. Second of all, I had no clue if Logan was just that good or had taken the class before, because he dove for that baby.
Yeah. And not only was it the first time I met you, that was also the first time that I met Logan.
Okay. So he hadn't taken your class yet.
He had not taken my class. And so
that was impressive. Not gonna lie.
That was the first class that I had met Logan, who's also going to be on your show and who is also one of our cadre members. And that way there's few moments where you're like, okay, that dude gets it, or that chick is totally into the job. And so like when I think he dropped a ladder and like dove head first to grab the kid.
Yes.
And I was like, all right, find out who that dude is. And I remember turning to one of the other instructors that was with us. I'm like, find out who that dude is. I want to talk to him. And that was kind of the start of Logan and I's friendship as well. So
friendship.
Yeah. So, but no, keep going.
No, it was then basically just going throughout the whole Friday. It was long. It was hard. I'm pretty sure I ended up accidentally stabbing one of your instructors in the back with a Halligan while I was trying to drag him out of a house. I'm so sorry for that, by the way. Oh, do you remember that?
You did. Yeah. No, okay. I mean, we get routinely injured doing a lot of different stuff, but yes, I do distinctly remember somebody coming out and being like, I don't know what I got hit with, but that really hurt. And I'm pretty sure I have a stab wound in my back.
Whoops.
Sorry.
Sorry.
They didn't die.
However many years later, I'm sorry. They didn't die. I saw them again. I don't know if he liked me so much the second time around, but
it's fine. It happens.
But no, go through the whole class. It was a great day. It was worked me really hard. I loved it. I thought that was it. Just fantastic. Go take all day Saturday lecture classes. It was great. Well, what had happened that weekend with Les Luker, something screwy happened, I think, with the registration. Mm-hmm. So the classes were screwed up. And so they kind of said, just kind of take what you want and sign in once you're there, and we'll get it all figured out in the back end. So I took all the Saturday classes that I wanted to take. And then we were hanging out at the bar that night, and I got talking to one of your instructors. Can't remember his name.
Well, there was Dylan, there was Darren.
Oh, maybe it was Dylan. Maybe it wasn't me.
I think it was Dylan. because he was like, hey, I just got like 5 more people to sign up for our class. And I was like, okay.
Oh, I thought it was special. Never mind. Okay. No, but we were hanging out, and I went up to go get another drink, and he talked to him a little bit, and he was just like, yeah, we didn't have you in class today. I'm like, well, I was taking the classroom or the stuff today and everything. And he's like, you should really come back. I'm like, I don't know if I'm up for another day of this. This was a lot of work the first time. I loved it, but I'm kind of new at this, and I don't think it's going to work out that well. And after probably 10 or 15 minutes of talking, he convinced me to basically switch my classes up and come back the next day and do hands-on training again. Okay, so I go back, completely dead already. It's like this 4 hours are going to wipe me out from that morning. And with the fluke of classes, there was only 5 or 6 people in the class. And what, you had 4 instructors there?
Yeah.
4 or 5 instructors. So It was pretty much 1-to-1 the whole time.
Yep.
That's not normal, but it was incredible. It was so crazy. And we went in so many times. I had so many cycles in going through with it. It was just, I don't know. It's something I went back and I told the rest of my department about, and they never quite understood, but it's just like, you don't get that most of the time. And even if it would have been a full class, we still would have got more reps in than what you would at other classes that I had gone to before. So anyway, so then that second day, the first day was great. Don't get me wrong. I was whatever, but that Sunday morning was the big day, the pinnacle of, I'm going to this conference. I'm putting myself out there for this. I could either stay where I am and not grow anymore, basically just kind of stay on the track I'm on, or go head first into this thing and learn a whole lot more and try to keep going and whatnot. And that Sunday morning definitely set me on that second path.
Yeah, I think I remember the moment that actually happened. So yeah, and if you don't want me to tell the story, I won't. It's up to you. But I love telling the story of the Dragon Slayer. So do you mind?
That's fine.
Okay. So when you came to our class the first day, you were timid. You were really quiet. And we always size up all the different students and kind of figure out where their strengths and where their weaknesses are. But for me, one of the things that I was looking at was you were eager to learn, but you were super, super reserved, and you were just kind of like sitting back and you're in the corner and you're kind of watching everything go down. And so we were trying to engage you and trying to get you involved, and you kind of came out of your shell on that first day. And then the second day when you showed up, I remember you walked up to me and you were like, hey, do you have a second? And I'm like, yeah, what's up? And you're like, all right, listen, I don't get a lot of fire training. I don't get a lot of live fire training. I am super nervous about this. And I'm like, listen, you're going to be fine. Just stick with us. And, we're not going to like throw you in the burn container and just be like, here you go. And so we talked about a lot of different things. And as you were going in on that first scenario, I remember that the best way that I can equate it is you're like the real quiet lady from Police Academy, where she's standing there and she's like, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. And then eventually she's like, get out of the damn way. Like you started coming out of your shell because like people were walking over you, like figuratively and literally. They were walking over you because you were like super worried about going down the hallway, and there was a lot of smoke and then there was a lot of heat. And so after the first scenario, I pulled you off to the side and I'm like, all right, listen, I'm like, I want you to sit there and think about this for 2 seconds. What is your goal here? And you're like, well, I want to be a better firefighter. And I'm like, great. And I said, why are you here? And you're like, I'm here to learn. I said, great. We're going to teach you. And I said, you are going to be my Dragon Slayer. Like, you are going to be the one that goes in and knocks this fire out. And you're like, I don't think I can do that. I'm like, you're going to do it. And you're going to be my Dragon Slayer. You're going to be my Dragon Slayer. And you're like, yeah, I think I can be your Dragon Slayer. And so as we're talking, you're getting more and more kind of, amped up. And I can tell you're kind of getting excited. And I'm like, okay, great. Let's go do this. And so as we made it down that hallway, for those of you listening, we were in a Connex box apartment kind of style layout, and it was connected to a flashover container. So in that flashover container, we're burning OSB And I mean, nothing super crazy, but we did have some really, really good, thick, dark smoke. We had trailers, we had streamers, we had, rollovers. And I remember as we turned the corner, I looked at you and your eyes just got really big, and there's fire rolling down this hallway. And I'm like, open that line and go slay that dragon. And all of a sudden you just screamed out, you're like, I'm a dragon slayer. And you went down that hall and you started screaming and you were putting that fire out. And within about 30, 40 seconds, that fire got knocked down. And when we came out, the look on your face as you took your mask off, you were smiling from ear to ear, and you just turned to all of us and you were like, that was the coolest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And so that was the moment where I was like, okay, she gets it. Like, she absolutely gets it. The fear of either making a mistake or not knowing what you're doing was gone. And it was replaced with you kind of replaced that fear with confidence. And so seeing that in your eyes and seeing it in your body language, I was like, all right, cool. And for the rest of the conference, I mean, I don't know if you realize it, but I mean, you were literally coming down the hallway and the guys that were doing searches, you're like, hey, move, I'm pulling the hose line, get out of my way. And the guys are like, who the hell is this chick? And when they come back out, they're like, is that Taylor? Did she just tell me to get out of the way? Because you hadn't said anything in the morning part, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you got very aggressive, and you got very, in a good way.
I don't remember any of that, but that was a blur. Just not gonna lie.
I know. And so, no,
very
it was
overstimulating for the weekend.
There was a lot of information that was coming at you. But no, I mean, it was cool to see you come out of your shell, and you definitely, the biggest takeaway for me was that you replaced that fear and not being confident with being confident, but still wanting to learn. And so every step of the way, you were trying different patterns and you were trying different nozzle selections. And when we showed you the difference between the smooth bore and the fog, you're like, oh my God, I get it. Like, I totally get it now, because the fog does this and the smooth bore does this. And so when we walked out, I just remember like the look on your face as you walked away, and I turned to some of the other instructors and they were like, okay, dude, she gets it. And again, as I said before, it wasn't maybe 6 or 7 months later that you had kind of reached out to me and you're like, okay, here's where I was when I showed up for that conference, and here's where I'm at now. And it's because of your guys' class. And that was huge. I mean, it almost kind of, I don't get all teary eyed and like super sentimental. But
you're a man,
did.
you don't get all sentimental.
No, I mean, I do. I mean, listen, I cry at commercials all the time. My wife's like, oh my God, stop, just change the channel, quit watching this. But no, I mean, it really changed how I viewed what your interaction with us was, because I thought it was just us teaching you some cool stuff and you got to take some things back to your department. We didn't realize how much of an impact we had on you until you had reached out to us.
That's the interesting thing though, because you don't know how much impact you have on another person, and you can't ever be the judge of that. You can never know until somebody else tells you if you were or weren't an impact. I mean, it's one of those things, like, you don't always have to be on your guard necessarily, but you never know like how many other people could have been after me that you have taught or before me, and you just, maybe they never told you exactly how much it meant to them, but maybe it did the same thing as well, and typically, granted, in the fire service, you don't tend to have a lot of people who've really never done something, come into your classes. So it doesn't happen that often, but it's crazy because you never know who's in that class and what their life circumstances have been like, and where their personal journey is at the moment, and what impact you can have. So if you have a bad interaction, if you're having a bad day as an instructor, this is just coming from a student. I've never actually instructed anything except for a couple local trainings, but if you come at it lazy, like, or whatever, that could have a negative impact and could send somebody down the other path where they're just not into it anymore. Or, if you bring it every day that you're training, like you guys did that day. I don't know what it was that day, but you guys, or that weekend, but you guys were super into it no matter what. And even though it was cold,
it was super cold. It was so cold. But that you bring up a really good point. I think, we as instructors have to be acutely aware of what we're saying and how we're saying it. And so, me as an instructor and also as a business owner for a training company, you have to be aware of how your students are putting out, or how your students are receiving the information that you're putting out. Mm-hmm. And, we're real picky about who we choose as instructors, because we don't want to have somebody who everybody's entitled to have a bad day.
Yeah.
Right.
It happens.
But imagine your situation if you would have gone and Dylan and Darren and myself would have been like, yeah, well, you go down the hallway, you spray some water, the fire goes out, it's cold, let's get this done. And that's it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
You would have never got the experience that you got. And so I think it's really important for instructors to understand what they're putting out and how it's perceived by the students. And it's also important for the students to understand that you're going to have instructors that have a bad day and they might not be on their A game. Those things happen from time to time, but the goal is to find classes and instructors where they're able to overcome that, or they're still going to put out a quality class even when they're having a bad day.
Yeah. No, it was an amazing experience. And now, like, every year, I'm just excited to see you back at Les Lucard again. You haven't done hot classes again there yet, but it's still
maybe
nice
someday. Yeah, we'd love to come back and do hot classes. We really focus on the realism in training, and I think that's what benefited you the most. And not to bust your bubble, but I mean, the class wasn't just about you, right? Like there were.
I know that, but you guys did such a good job somehow at like tailoring it to Taylor a little bit.
We did.
And still serving people like Logan or other people, in the class. And I don't know how you did it, but it was amazing.
And that's the point that
I didn't feel defeated.
Yeah. And that's the point that I was making, is that it really truly wasn't just about you. It was about everybody. And we tailored different things. Like you didn't get to see the other scenarios, like the other scenarios that we put out there. If there were more veteran people who are more experienced, we gave them harder scenarios than what you had. But at the end of the day, we were burning a lot of OSB. We tailored the smoke conditions and the fire conditions to be as realistic as we could humanly make them without violating like every NFPA policy and standard. And so, a lot of people, when they came out of that class, yours, and when we've done that class in other places, they're like, man, I've never seen fire conditions like that inside our burn building. And we've had instructors who have come back, or not instructors rather, but like they're the hosting agency's training staff. And they're like, hey man, that smoke's really dark. It's looking like it's getting ready to roll over. And I'm like, right, that's what we're trying to do. And they're like, are you sure? Like, are you guys monitoring this? And we're like, no. We have like 4 ticks. We're good. Like it's 350, 400. Like we're probably going to get it up to 5 or 6. But they're like, okay, once they kind of get comfortable with what we're doing, we want to have those different flow paths. We want to have the different conditions to where, one time it's going to be a room and contents and you can go knock it out with a water can. But we also want to be able to have that fire coming down the hallway at you where you have to fight with it a little bit. And so that was when we put you in there, and I'll never forget when your eyes got really big and you did the battle cry and you're like, I'm a dragon slayer. And you went down the hallway. You didn't realize you were doing it, but you opened up that nozzle and you just flowed water the entire time as you were going down that hall. And so in that moment, you got everything that we were trying to teach you. And so from you to all the other students, everybody got kind of their own individual
experience from it.
Yeah, they were able to pull from it in their own way. And so that's really important for us, is to make sure that it's realistic and that everybody is able to take something from it, whether you're brand new right out the gate, or if you've been in the fire service for 20 years, we want you to learn something.
That was the weirdest thing, is putting my hand up. And like, I hadn't been in a super dark smoke filled environment like that before, not that crazy. And I put my hand out and it just leaves. You just can't see it. You can't replicate it. It's really hard to replicate. I'm just like, this is so weird.
Yeah.
I've never been anywhere where I can't see out like a foot past my face. Like I don't know. It took me a few times to kind of come to terms with that, to figure out, okay, just do everything the same way you've been doing it and you'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's that confidence building thing. I mean, a lot of people have not done anything other than theatrical smoke, and it has its place, right? Like, I'm not saying that you have to do live fire 110% every time. But that theatrical smoke does not compare with the actual performance of real fire conditions. And so you weren't the only one who was like, I've never seen that before in real life.
Okay. So talking about realistic trainings, it's something different than what you tend to get at your home departments. And there are ways definitely to make your home trainings more realistic. And there are definitely a lot of pros to going to trainings that that boast realistic training to it. So when we were at that training at Les Lukert, this is the one I'm pulling from, even though I've gone to a couple different ones with you now, but at that one, because the training you did over the weekend was Fire for Effect, is what you did. And I remember going back in on Sunday morning, and you had gone through a few different ways to make training realistic very, very easily back at your department. And I've talked about some of these before on another episode of the podcast. But one of the ones I saw you do, which just seems so simple to me. It's just, why hadn't, I'm sure other people have thought about before, but you took 5-gallon buckets. I think you had cement or something, and you put gate posts in it, and you made a gate.
Yeah.
Just, had you seen that somewhere before? You just kind of thought of it, or?
So with all great things in the fire service, that, we all at times think alike. And so I had seen it in some other places, and I've seen it since. And there's no like direct correlation that I can sit there and be like, oh, I learned it from here, and somebody learned it from me. Like, I think we all had the same idea.
It happens a lot.
But I mean, I know, like the throwing babies thing that came from Brothers in Battle out in the Pacific Northwest. And, we had already been doing things like that, but not to the extent that they do. And so we kind of picked and pulled from what they do. And so the post thing, it really kind of came from having, I went to a training where they were parking cars where the ladders were supposed to be placed. And so you had these obstacles that you couldn't place the ladder where you wanted to because there's a car there. And so it really challenged you, because in your head, what you're trained during Fire 1 and Fire 2 is that, your ladder has to be a perfect, 72 degrees, and you have to do the arm test and all this other stuff. Well, when you don't have the ability to do that, what do you do? And so that kind of progressed to, okay, if we're going to do this, let's build like a patio with a gate where they have limited access, or maybe there's a lock on the gate and they can't get through. And so we tell the students, if we don't build a full out, with pallets and stuff, build a full gate, or a fence, we'll at least say, hey, your access is through that gate. You cannot come to the other side until everyone goes through that gate. And so it's just something simple. We built it there in Kearney, and we left it. And to my knowledge, they're still using it. I mean,
I think so. It was there last year when I was there.
Yeah. And
I was surprised to see it. So no, it's something easy that you can just kind of pick up, move to a different space. And even if you have the same training building that you're doing with everything, you just make it a little bit different scenario by moving that around. Are there some other little, I guess not even little, just any other easy ones for departments to start implementing for their?
Yeah. So the one that I'm really big on right now, and it kind of comes in ebbs and flows, right? There's certain things that shiny keys, and I focus on that for a little bit. But, one of the things that has bugged me for a long time is that, if we go and I'll ask you, like, thermal imager training, if you do searches with a thermal imager in the bay of a station, the victim is always going to be the lighter color in the screen, right? Because they're the warmest thing in the room. Well, when we go into fires, the victims are routinely not the warmest thing in the room. So they're going to be a darker color, different shades of grays and blacks. And so when we talk about, recognizing and what you're seeing and what your brain perceives, as I started talking to a lot of other veteran firefighters, I'm like, hey, how many times have you seen, whether it's a dog or a cat or some sort of victim, right? It doesn't have to be a human. But how many times have you seen something and you scanned right past it because it wasn't what you're used to seeing in the colorization? And we all started thinking about it, and it's like, oh crap, that's actually, like, that happens a lot. And something as simple as like a couch or a chair, it's the complete opposite. In training, it's going to be the darkest thing because it's the coolest thing in the room. Well, when you're in a fire, those things are absorbing the radiant heat, and so they're going to look different. And so what we started doing is taking mannequins, we would hose them off so that they're the coolest thing in the room. If we use a live victim, we would actually, we'd take a bucket of ice or whatever, and we put their arms and legs inside the bucket for, 5-6 seconds, just something to cool it off. And then we'd run the scenario. So when the person's scanning with their thermal imager, as they come across this victim, it's cool to watch, because if they haven't ever seen this before, they'll scan the room and they'll scan right past the victim. And then you'll see them stop for a second and they go right back. And it's almost like it took longer for their brain to process, like, oh, hell, that's an arm and a leg.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's something that you can do that's of very little cost. You know, and there are some companies, and I say this a lot, like there are companies out there right now that are making coveralls or things that you can attach to a mannequin or a person that have heat packs, or they have the coils that heat up. And the thought process is, well, you know, it'll work better for your thermal imager. Well, yeah, that's great, but that's the complete opposite of what we want the students to see. Where I see that being really applicable is like search and rescue training, you know, out in the wilderness where you're having to search, or water rescue training where you want that to be the warmest thing in the water. So it has its place, but for structural search and rescue, that's not it. You know, you want that victim to be the coolest thing in the room. So that's kind of been my soapbox here for the last year or so, as I'm trying to change that mentality and change that mindset of, we don't want to have the victim be the warmest thing in the room, because most of the time in a real fire, they're not.
Interesting, because I don't know if I've heard that from you before. And when we had put together kind of our episode on some realistic trainings that Chris and I had thought of, and a couple that we gave you due credit, okay, but we had borrowed from you and things. You know, one of the ideas was, we actually thought of just doing ice packs.
Yeah.
And just throwing a bunch of, because like what Chris and I even have like 5 or so here. You get other people who have a bunch of ice packs, or just bags of ice or whatever, and just use that. It's cheap, and you're able to stick them in the freezer to refreeze again and bring them back out, and just stick that with a person or a mannequin or whatever. So, I mean, it's funny, same train of thought. I just hadn't heard that anywhere before. So I was just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I've toyed around with, you know, if you think about a lot of the newer thermal imagers, they have the capability of getting really, really detailed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so even something as simple as, you know, I don't know, a wheel chalk, you know, like something inanimate that you can sit there and take and be like, okay, we're going to go throw this in the fridge for 5 minutes and then go put it in the room. Like, it's something that's different. And you can have it be whatever you want it to be. And so it really is, you know, with baby mannequins, with adult mannequins, it doesn't have to be. I mean, there are times where they are going to be the warmest thing on the room, but just having that variability of like, sometimes they are the warmest things, sometimes they're not. I think that that's important to get our recognition prime decision making tuned for that.
Yeah. So my brain often wanders, as it does. So I'm thinking just randomly, in some of your scenarios or whatever, or in trainings you've gone to or put on, do you ever or often put victims or things like just under blankets or hiding different places or whatever? Because like, it's the worst thing that's ever going out is however everyone tells people, or the public tells the public to go hide in places or whatever when a fire happens and things.
Right.
How often do you do that to kind of, I don't know, just curious.
Yeah. So I will tell you this, a lot of our scenarios are spur of the moment, right? The outline of the scenario, we know what it is and it's planned well in advance. But as far as where the victims are going to be and the way in which the victims are going to present themselves are different from scenario to scenario. And sometimes they change depending on the students during the scenario. So a great example. I'll give you this. So like we routinely put, you know, mannequins in beds underneath blankets.
Okay.
We put baby mannequins in cribs with a whole bunch of other toys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in the perfect world, as a parent, we all know that, you know, you're not supposed to put your kid face down. You're not supposed to put your kid in there with a bunch of stuff that they could choke on.
Oh, but you do it.
The real world is a lot of parents do that. Mm-hmm. And so when you're doing a search and it's like, you know, Cabbage Patch Kid, Cabbage Patch Kid, Cabbage Patch Kid, oh crap, that's a real kid, right? Like that's hard to discern in a real fire. So we do that a lot where we'll take a mannequin and say, okay, here's going to be your baby mannequin. And then we put it in there with a bunch of Cabbage Patch or stuffed animals or whatever. And then as far as the victims, we put them in precarious places. Like we'll put them in a tub, right? Okay. But we don't put them in a tub that's empty. We fill the tub up with water.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And so, because I mean, think about
things, it. Yeah.
If you're going to go sit in a tub and you're going to try to protect yourself from a fire, most people are going to say, oh my God, I'm going to burn alive. So I'm going to turn on the water. So we put them in the water because when you search that tub, your first instinct, when you put your hand in there and all of a sudden your glove gets wet, you're going to pull your hand back out. Mm-hmm. And you're going to be like, okay, wait a minute. Was that a toilet? What was that? And so some people won't actually go back and search the rest of the tub. If we're not using live fire, Todd Edwards has done this, and I've done it a couple times as well. I will get into the tub, and when they come find me, I'm going to kind of go nuts on them, right? Like I'm going to cough and hack. And then when they grab me, I'm going to kind of spaz out a little. So when you kind of perked up when I said that we change it during the actual scenario. If the students are spot on and they're just finding all the victims real quick and they're doing what they're supposed to do, I may make it a little bit more difficult. I may sit there. If I'm laying flat on the floor, I might go wedge myself behind a couch.
Wow.
So it depends on the level of the students. If they're getting a little bit too comfortable, we're going to spin it up a little bit to make it harder for them.
That's nice. That's an interesting way to do it too, because then you can make it different for each person that comes in and searches and put it to their skill levels for it.
Sure. And one other thing real quick. So this is not on the civilian rescue side, but I was just in Georgia for the Bearers of the Oath conference, and I ended up being a victim for Firefighter Survival. And when they said, "Hey, Dave, you're going to be a victim. You're going to be unconscious. Go in there and do your thing," I was like, "Okay, cool." So I found the weirdest, smallest corner that I could wedge myself into. And it happened to have a wall breach prop. So I stuck my head halfway through the wall breach prop, and I had the regulator hose was kind of wrapped around. And this all at the time it was for theatrical stuff, but I wrapped some things around the beams. And so it wasn't just a straight, like, go in, grab the firefighter and pull them out, but I took a toddler mannequin and put it underneath me. So the scenario was, and they didn't know this at the time, but the scenario was that I was a firefighter who had found a victim, was on his way out, got disoriented, got lost, ended up in a corner, and ran out of air. And so when they came and got me, I got to be honest, man, the crew that came and got me, when they rolled me off, they started checking my air. They checked to see if I was breathing. I held my breath. They were like, "Hey, he's not breathing. We need to get him out." And about 5 seconds after they started dragging me, one of the guys was like, "Hey, did you search the area to make sure that there's no other victims?" And the other guy was like, "No." And he goes back. He's like, "Victim, victim, victim. I got a toddler." I'm like, "Damn it." I was like, man, I was really hoping I was going to get him on that. Yeah. But I mean, again, the way that we teach RIT and the way that we teach firefighter survival, it's always unconscious, cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
That's all we ever train for. We don't train for other scenarios where what were they doing when they got in the Mayday? What were they doing when they were ran out of air? It's not always me just running out of air in the middle of a big warehouse. It might be that I'm dragging a victim.
Well, yeah. And I know one of your big things is if you train for these different scenarios and everything, you've already come up against it once. So it's not going to be weird to you when you go and face it or something, either that level or under or whatever, when you actually go to an actual fire.
Yeah.
That's definitely the extreme scenario for it, but yeah.
Right. And those students did a great job. I mean, they figured it out really quickly. The other students that came through in the other evolutions, they never caught it. They got outside, and at the very end of the scenario, I'm like, "Hey, did you guys ever search the area that I was in?" And they were like, "No." I'm like, "Well, you missed a toddler."
So with realistic training, I guess, do you have any other just basic thoughts over any of it?
So I think yes, I think in a general sense, when you talk about realism in training, in no other occupation do we go as unrealistic as we do in the fire service, right? So the one that I always use is like airline pilots, right? When they learn how to fly airliners, when they learn how to fly commercial jets, they do thousands and thousands of hours in a simulator. And that simulator can replicate almost everything. The only thing that I know of for a fact that they can't replicate is water landings, which I'll get to in a second. But I mean, they can replicate storms. They can replicate electrical failures. They can have switches that lock up. I mean, there's all sorts of things that they can replicate. And so imagine if, you got on an airplane and somebody was flying that plane, and the first thing that they said was, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your pilot. We're going to be flying to Atlanta today. Just so you know, I've never actually flown a real airplane. I have 30,000 hours in a simulator, and they say that that's going to be good enough." I'm not staying on that damn plane. Right? Like, if you've never flown a real airplane and this is the first time, I don't want to be your guinea pig. And so we have a really big tendency in the fire service to rely on simulations and theatrical stuff, right? And that's great, but I think you have to have realistic situations to replicate as close to real life as you can, which means real fire, real smoke conditions, in some cases, real victims, right? And I'm not advocating putting real victims in real burning buildings, but having them come out and having a real victim sitting there having difficulty breathing because they got smoke inhalation. That's a lot different than the always unconscious victim that we pull out, right?
Yeah.
So again, those pilots that spend thousands of hours in a simulator, they get to the point where they can handle almost anything, and then they spend thousands of hours flying real planes. Law enforcement does simulator training all the time, and then they go out and they shoot real guns. Military does the same thing. Fire service, we put somebody through a simulation and then we throw them on a rig and expect them to go fight a real fire. And that's it. Like, hey, hope your training was good enough. And so I feel like as a
if
fire
you get
service,
a lot of that training.
right. And so my thing is, I think we need to do better as a fire service of kind of getting with looking at other professions and how they do training. Don't get me wrong. I know cops that go around and do training with Nerf guns, right? Or airsoft guns or BB guns, not BB, but like the little, simunitions.
Yeah.
And they hurt really bad. But there are ramifications, right? Like I went and did simunitions training for TAC medic stuff. And when I got shot, I still have scars, right? Like I still have marks on my arm. You can't see them. I'm showing Taylor, but I mean, I literally still have a scar on my arm from simunitions, and it hurt. And I know I have a completely different respect for that type of training now that I've been shot at and hit. And so in fire, yeah, you can go through a really, really not hot gas-fed fire. But if that's the only thing that you know when you're in a real fire and your ears start burning and you get those pinpricks across the back of your neck and your tank starts getting hot, it's a completely different situation. And so I feel like we're doing a disservice to the fire service by putting people out there who haven't experienced that.
You almost put a false sense of confidence into people, and they just don't know what they're walking into, like you're saying, and they think everything's going to be fine, and the worst it's going to get is X far, and it can get worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And even something as far as having some sort of structural collapse. I mean, people, unless they have been immobilized and not able to move, it's something that you never want to have. I mean, I've gotten wrapped up in wires. I've had, trusses come down, not a whole truss, but I've had things come down on top of me where it kind of stopped me up. And I was like, oh, I'm going to have to get out of this before I can move. And it's not a fun feeling.
No, I got super lucky. I was, I'll call it air quotes structural collapse, because technically the kitchen did collapse in, but it was so slow motion that you had plenty of time to get out of the way and everything was fine and whatnot. And then we evacuated from there after that. But it was, so, air quotes structural collapse. But if that would have actually happened, just my training at the time, because that was before I came out and did things with you or anything, what state would I have been in? What would I have been able to do? Would I have been in a good state of mind and have the tools and mindset to be able to get out there? Yeah.
And that's, I wholeheartily believe, kind of in a nutshell, to answer your question. You talked about rabbit holes earlier, and this is kind of one of them. But to answer your question, I don't think that the first time a lot of the firefighters in the fire service should experience this stuff is on an actual fire. We should be able to replicate this stuff. And I'm not talking about live fire, right? Like I would never advocate for trapping somebody underneath something in live fire. That's a horrible idea. Don't do that. But they can be in theatrical smoke and limited visibility and be trapped and restricted in their movement, and make them find their way out, make the other crews work to figure out a way to get something off of them or from around them. Because the first time that happens, you don't want it to be at 3:00 in the morning on a real fire.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I want to touch on before we jump off of the subject is the adding stress to your realistic trainings. Is there a system of how you figure out how much stress to put on, or how you build stress? Especially, let's say it is for a department that either your department or department you used to training a lot. How often do you increase the stress that's put on them? And I guess, what are some ways that you do increase the stress that's put on them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So stress inoculation training is a wonderful thing. For those of you that don't know this, stress makes you stupid. right? You do stupid things. And the one thing that I always say in my classes is like, if you don't believe me, think about the last time you were attracted to somebody and you had this whole plan of what you were going to say to them. And you walked right up to them, your heart rate increases and tachycardia makes you stupid. And you might have had the greatest pickup line in the world, but what comes out of your mouth is, hi. Right.
Reminds me of when I'm doing a podcast. You have all this great stuff. You have all your notes written, then you go, bleh.
Absolutely. And so, we tend to underestimate the impact that stress has on us. So, the biggest issue with stress inoculation training is that everybody deals with stress differently. And so it's really finding what your students or your subjects are going to do when they're stressed out and how much stress you have to apply. So a great example of that is there are the known conditions, right? You have condition white, gray, red, or white, yellow, red, black. And there's some grays in there. Anyway, if you go look it up, if you Google it, the stress chart, different heart rates. And the one that we really try to keep people in is like condition gray and condition red. Condition black is where you basically go in the fetal position and piss your pants. And we don't want people, we don't want people to do that. Yeah. We don't want them to check out completely. But if people are not getting stressed out, you want to get them worked up. And the goal that we're looking for is the reduction of fine motor skills, right? So I don't want them to be able to manipulate small things like a radio knob. I want them to not be able to use their fingers effectively. The other thing that I want is some sort of auditory inclusion. So, if I can get them stressed out enough to where things are starting to become hard to hear, or they start getting tunnel vision, because those go hand in hand. So the ways in which we do that is going to be different for everybody, but you can do physical activity, right? So if I have them run a circuit and get their heart rate up, then I apply something that they're not familiar with. So maybe putting together Lego blocks, right? You've just exerted them. Their heart rate is already up. Now you tell them that they have 30 seconds to put together this Lego block, and you give them the instructions, and they have to sit there with their fire gloves on and their mask and put everything together. That's mentally stressful, right? You can add in some screaming or some loud music. And so once we get them up to that point where they're stressed, now this is where it begins. And so now we can take those students and have them go perform a search. And during that search, we're going to throw them some curveballs. We're going to be yelling at them, whether it's somebody in the front yard screaming, my kids are inside, you have to go get them. And so again, as I've done this with other students, we want them to get stressed out to where they start looking around. And I know this is audio only, so people can't see this, but if you see people kind of looking from left to right and they're searching for something, that's them trying to figure out what they're going to do next. They're not familiar with the process. And so they're, for lack of better terms, they're searching that Rolodex and they can't come up with anything. Right?
Does everybody do that and they just don't notice it?
I think they do. I mean, in my experience, yeah, they're just kind of, yeah, they'll either look at the ground or they'll kind of look side to side. Right. And so I'm constantly gauging students. Like if you're looking straight at me, or if you're functioning and you're going from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4, and you're just not missing a beat, you're able to handle that stress a lot better. If you look at newer people who are more inexperienced, about the time that they come off the rig to go pull the hose line and I grab them and I'm screaming in their face, my kids are trapped on the second floor. You got to go get them. Oh my God, you got to save my kids. Holy shit. Oh my God. They just, I mean, literally they start looking left and right and left and right. And what they're looking for is somebody else to tell them what to do, because they've never been in that situation. And so as an instructor, this is a great opportunity for somebody to be like, okay, listen, what are you going to do? Because you have a freaking out family member. What is the most logical thing to do? And unfortunately, some people who try to do stress inoculation training, they just apply stress. They don't actually do the teaching part, right? So when somebody is in that position where they're kind of freaking out a little bit and they don't know what to do, that's a great opportunity to grab them and say, okay, here's what I want you to do. Tell that person you are going to do everything you can to go find their family member, but they need to back up because you need to do your job. And they'll do that. And then I'll back off, right? And then they continue about their business. What we find is that people have adverse reactions to stress if we've never taught them what to do. So take that same new firefighter who gets off the rig and they're approached by a real victim's family member on a real fire and they start putting hands on, you have people that will start screaming at civilians.
Jeez,
You know, get the F away from me, get off me. I'm going to have you arrested. That doesn't make anything better.
No.
Right? That's not what they want to hear, but all they know is that somebody's coming at them and they don't know how to react. And so they're just going to do what they normally do. Maybe they're aggressive in their personal life. So they're going to be like, get the F away from me or I'll punch you in the mouth.
Mm-hmm.
That's not real good for PR, right?
No, it's not.
So basically when we talk about stress inoculation, you have to have the buildup, right? You have to get them stressed up in their own way. And then you have to be able to grab them and teach them. And that's going to solidify in their Rolodex whatever you just showed them. So if you do that multiple times over a year and do different scenarios so that they have different Rolodex cards, they're going to find something that closely resembles the situation that they were already in. And you and I'm glad that you hadn't brought it up, but I'm going to go ahead and drop it anyway.
Go ahead. I'm up for it.
This is the whole getting down to my underwear thing, right? Like when
I try to stay away from it because you give people crap for bringing it up all the time. And, you know, I wasn't going to be the one to do it.
I give people crap for posting pictures on social media about it. I don't mind if we talk about it.
Okay.
But no, I mean, me getting down to my underwear and screaming in Spanish or some other language, that is exactly what we're doing. We are breaking them of their, oh, we've always done it this way. And I've done this training 1,000 times. As soon as I take my clothes off down to my underwear and I come running out of the building and I'm screaming, you literally see people, their stress level goes up, their respiratory rate goes up. You know, they're like, I've never seen this before. I don't know what to do with this. What do I do? I can't touch this guy because he's naked. What am I going to do? All these things are running through their head. And so that's a great opportunity for us to stop and be like, okay, what would you do? How are you going to handle this? And then as the scenarios go on, you'll see that when that happens, people just do instinctively what they're supposed to do and what you want them to do.
So since you brought it up, one of the time, the first time I saw you do that, it wasn't with me in there doing it, but it was that first year at Les Lukert. And it was the group in front of me. And they gone in, you were in there too, and they brought you out, you're in your underwear. They brought you outside the door, left you there, went back in, shut the door. You turned around to all of us who were standing there. You're like, well, they did that wrong. And you walked right back in. It was the funniest thing ever.
Yep.
But then the next time you went back in, they brought you out and they handed you off to somebody else. And it was the same exact firefighter. That firefighter learned, okay, this isn't going to work with this guy. You actually have to give him to somebody. And I don't know if you told him what to do or had him think about it, or if he just thought about it on his own to hand you off to somebody else.
Yeah. So when they found me, I remember that like it was yesterday. So when they found me, I was hacking and coughing and I kept saying, my brother's in the back. My brother's in the back. You got to go get my brother. He's in the back bedroom. You got to go get my brother. And they're dragging me out and I'm hacking and coughing. And I kept trying to turn around. And when they walked out, they just kind of shoved me, like you said.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's exactly what I said. It was, well, they didn't do that right. And so when I went back in, I literally tackled on top of them and was trying to push them out of the way. And I'm like, you got to get my brother. You guys aren't getting him fast enough. He's going to die, as I'm hacking and coughing and whatever. And so the one guy was like, what in the hell is this? And I remember him just kind of like, what do I do with this? And I looked at him. I said, you guys left me out there unattended. Of course, I'm going to come back and try and get my brother. And he was like, oh, and the light bulb clicked on. Right. And so sometimes you can do that after the scenarios, but especially in those situations, I want to do it right then and there because I want them to learn that lesson.
It was so nice, especially just being someone on the outside. I wasn't going through that scenario at that point, but that has stuck with me so much just watching you from the outside. It's like, well, they did that wrong. And then next time handed you off to somebody else. Like that will be number one. I've never had that happen, but that will be number one what I do just because it was so impactful, like looking at it and like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And, you know, we did a similar scenario down in Oklahoma City. And what I told those cadets, and these are recruits for Oklahoma City Fire Department. What I told them is, guys, think about this, whether it's a victim or a victim's family member or somebody who is, you know, has priceless heirlooms or, you know, a recording artist whose all of their instruments are inside, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. If you're never going to be able to move fast enough to make them happy, they're always going to want you to move faster. And there are people who will disregard their own safety and they will try to get back in the house because they don't think you're doing the best thing. And so,
sorry, go ahead.
No, so I mean that's it. I mean, there are people who are going to run back in the building to save a dog or a computer or their family member. I mean, obviously the family member would be at the top of that list, but we routinely see it where people are really upset. They don't feel like you're doing it right, so they're going to do it.
Well, imagine if you weren't a firefighter. If my husband wasn't a firefighter and something happened to either me or your wife or something, or your kid or whatever, like you would be in the exact same boat. And I think sometimes we forget that. We forget
Sure.
how we would act, that we would act like that if we didn't know, if we didn't have the training or the knowledge about what happens on a fire scene inside a structure like that. So
Yeah, and for the people listening, I'm real big in analogies. If you haven't figured it out in the last hour, but so one of the things I'm also a paramedic, and so one of the things I do with all of my new EMT partners who maybe have a little bit less experience, I make them go lay on the cot. We strap them in just like they would with a normal patient, whether they're supine or they're sitting up a little bit, and we go drive around. And we take corners hard, we hit curbs, we go down gravel roads, we do a bunch of stuff because we want them to have the perspective of the patient.
that's a good idea.
Because sitting up in the front, you don't feel the forces, the G forces, like you do in the back. And so when you're laying flat on a cot and you take a turn a little bit too hard, that feeling of being on an already really narrow cot, right? When that cot starts moving and you're rolling because of the G force, you feel like you're going to fall off the damn thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very unsettling for some patients. And so we want the EMT to have that experience. And what we found is a lot of times they'll be maybe not, how do I say this kindly? They're not the best at driving the ambulance with a patient in the back until we do that. And once we do that, they have a whole new respect. And so that's what we're trying to do. The same thing with the fire service side is we want them to put themselves in the victim's shoes or the victim's family's shoes. The only way to do that is to replicate those type of situations.
So I want to touch on one last thing, even though I already said this before, like I don't know how many minutes ago, but one thing that I had thought was a good idea and have now learned and grown and realized it's not a great idea, to go back to the stress inoculation, to use the sound of your pass device going off as a stressor. I had thought, and Chris did too, for a while, that was a good idea. You should do that. And like for, if you're running the pumper, go ahead and put that up there. It adds noise, adds stress. But hearing some more and having Chris go through his academy and things like that, that is one thing that they don't joke about. And I understand why they don't joke about it at all. But it is one of those things. If that goes off, it doesn't matter if it's a train, doesn't matter if somebody accidentally set it off or whatever. Everyone drops what they're doing, and they go find the firefighter or find what's making the noise, no matter what. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah. So unfortunately, that kind of thought process was bound by blood, right? So we've had a lot of firefighters over the years, both in training and on actual fire ground, where people were so used to hearing that pass device that the firefighter's pass device was activated for minutes. I mean, like a long time. We're talking like 10, 15, 20 minutes before anybody was like, hey, has anybody seen Joe?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so unfortunately, in years past, we did do a lot of that. We used the pass device because it was readily available. Everyone has it on their pack. You can set off 2 or 3 of them. But when you start disregarding that, it becomes an issue. And so, yes, I agree in not using that. What I found works way better is smoke detectors.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you can set off smoke detectors. You can use, you can go to like Walmart.
YouTube. Oh, or
Yeah.
Walmart. Sorry.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, you can go to Walmart and buy a $40 speaker and play a YouTube video of smoke detector sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And like on the driver operator side, kind of like what you had mentioned, one of the things that I think is really great is taking like a smoke machine and placing it to where the smoke is going to obscure some things. And then also, yeah.
Okay.
Well, because think about it. I mean, if you're on a fire ground, you're not always out of the smoke.
Yeah. You try to be, but not always. It doesn't always work. So yeah.
Right. And please don't be one of those people that's like, oh, well, they're in the smoke. They need to wear an air pack. I've seen it and I've said things about it. If you want to put on a half mask respirator or something, I guess, and whatever. But I mean, the level of smoke that you're going to get exposed to shouldn't be like being in a house. But if you're going to use that, what about if you're in a foggy environment? What if it's foggy outside and you're trying to read your pump panel and everything's glazed over? So there's a lot of different ways to stress people out other than air packs. I don't like using SCBAs and pass devices as a stressor, because you're right. If it's going off, there's a reason why it's going off, and we need to look into it.
Yeah, it's just something I learned very, very recently. And I'm like, oh crap, I was one of those people who suggested doing that and who had done that before for people. And I didn't know any better.
Right. You're not alone. You're not alone. And there's a lot of people that do. And again, it's what's convenient. It's already there, right? We have a bunch of them. If one stops working, it's fine. We can just pick up another one. So, but yeah, there are a lot of other things that we can use that would be a lot more beneficial in the long run.
Yeah, that way you just don't get used to the sound and hearing it all the time. And, then you glaze past it in your mind when you're on a scene or, like you said, on a training and something happens. So no, they take it very seriously, where if something happens, no matter what, everyone stops what they're doing and they go figure it out. And I don't know, something interesting. And I'd like to see departments do that in their trainings. So if they aren't already.
Absolutely.
So going off of realistic training. So I'm going to start a new thing where, if everyone is okay with it, I want to talk about family life, because it is something I am going into with Chris joining a career department, and I eventually will have kids someday, and I want to gather as much knowledge and information as I can from the rest of the fire service. So
sure. Yeah, let's do it.
So back when you started your fire career academy and things, were you dating? Were you married already? How did that look?
Yeah. So when I was in the fire academy, I was actually single. Okay. I was not dating anybody. And it was when I got into, I think I was in EMT. Yeah, I was in EMT when I met Katie, my wife, and we had kind of started dating, but it wasn't super serious. Mm-hmm. And so it was not super serious on both sides. So, I mean, we were dating casually, we were hanging out, going on dates, stuff like that. But when I got into paramedic school, we were actually living together. And so the time commitment for me to be able to go and do paramedic school, which was a 1-year program up at Creighton in Omaha, it was a lot. And there were a lot of times where she was like, hey, I'm going out with my friends. And I'm like, okay, well, where are you going? Like, what are you going to be doing tonight? And I mean, I'm busy studying and she's going out partying with her friends. And the whole time, I mean, if anybody's like, oh, yeah, well, that wouldn't bother me. Bullshit. It's going to bother you. Right. Yeah. And so there was some jealousy issues. There was some, God, I wish I could go and hang out, but I have to study. And so it was rough. It was a really rough year. And then after that, I moved down to Kansas City, and she stayed in Lincoln for a little while, and then eventually moved down to Kansas City with me. From there we got married and had kids and all that stuff.
So when you started having kids, how did that transition look like with your fire career? I don't exactly know what schedule you run or anything, depending on anything, but I mean, how did that work very well? Yeah. So I was working full-time EMS, and I was always doing volunteer or part-time fire. I've always done volunteer part-time fire from the beginning, but then originally in my career, it was just full-time EMS. Okay. And so that's how I paid the bills, because I figured, hey, you know what? Paramedics make more, like sole paramedics make more than fire medics. And my original intent was that I wanted to become a really good fire medic. And the only way that I saw to do that was to become a really good paramedic on the transport side. Because I grew up in Lincoln, and, I saw the difference between the people, not that they're better or worse, but I saw the people that had solely spent time on the pumper and had not done the transport. They were great for like the first 5 or 10 minutes, but anything that took longer than 5 or 10 minutes, they're like, hey, where's that ambulance? Where's the ambulance? Is the ambulance here yet? Where's the ambulance? Okay, how far out is the ambulance? So I saw it, and they were great medics, and I learned so much from a lot of those fire medics. And I owe my entire career to those guys, who now, ironically, are almost all retired. But having that mindset of like, okay, I really want to be a good fire medic, so I really want to spend some time on the transport side. It was important to me, and so having the ability to focus on that. When we started having kids, it got really, really difficult because I was working 24-hour shifts. My wife is pregnant.
On top of that, I'm going for truck checks and monthly training for the fire department. I'm running volunteer calls and I'm doing all this outside stuff. And so there were times where she's like, hey, I have an appointment with the doctor today. I'm getting a sonogram. And I'm like, cool, let's do it. What time? And she's like 10. And I'm like, oh, all right, I got to move some stuff around. And she's like, you're damn right, you're going to move some stuff around. And then, like, in my mind, I'm like, hey guys, I can't be at that meeting at 10 o'clock because we got to have a sonogram for my kid. And it was hard for me, right? Like, I wanted to be in two places at the same time and I couldn't be. And so her and I had a conversation very early on that when we started having kids, she wanted me to kind of step back a little bit. So she didn't want me to take on as many overtime shifts. She didn't want me to go and do as much training on the volunteer side.
Early on communication. I like that.
Yeah. And it was, it's hard for me to admit this now. Well, I take that back. It's easy for me to admit it now. It was hard for me to admit it back then. I was super, super selfish, right? Like I tried everything I could to kind of sneak in things where I could time wise. But she was also very understanding. Like if we were sitting there and we're talking and we're going to have friends over that night or whatever, the tones would drop for a house fire and she'd be like, go, just go. And I'm like, wait a minute, is this a trap? Like, I feel like maybe this is a trap. Like you're telling me I should go, but you look like you don't want me to go. And she was always very understanding and she'd be like, no, I don't want you to go, but I know you need to go. Mm-hmm. So compound that with a pregnant, hormonal, moody wife. And there was a lot of trial and error. There were a lot of times where I was like, ooh, that didn't work out. Mm-hmm. But as with the fire service, I had a great core support group and I had guys that were like, hey man, don't ever do that again, or don't say this, or, try this. And so between all of our friends and wives of other firefighters who were in the situation before we were, Katie had some people to talk to and bounce things off of. I had the same. And so we made it work, but it definitely was not easy.
That's nice having that network of people you can talk to about some difficult things like that. I know it seems like in other just normal jobs that other people have, they don't get down into knowing each other so intricately or talking about those types of things. But I can only imagine, especially where you tend to either have the 24-hour shifts on the medic side, at least you had at that point, I'm assuming 24-hour, I guess I never asked.
Yeah. So actually when I got pregnant, when Katie got pregnant, when we got pregnant, with Aiden, I was working for a hospital-based EMS service, which eventually turned into a county-based service. But it was actually, God, it was so messed up. It was a 40-hour week. So you ended up working like a 24 and then a 16.
Weird. Okay.
Yeah, it was super weird. But you got paid for 40 hours, but you were only working a 24-hour shift and a 16, and then you were off. And so that gave me a little bit more freedom. Mm-hmm. But then when it became a county service, it was every other day for 3 days, and then you had 4 days off. And so it was weird. It was kind of weird adjusting to it. But it took us probably a solid 4 or 5 months to kind of learn how to deal with it.
That's what I've been hearing, that 24-hour shifts really, really takes a lot of people anywhere between 3 and 6 months.
Yeah. 3 to 6 months of me working 24-hour shifts. And we had it pretty much down to a science. I mean, we kind of worked like a well-oiled machine. She knew where I was going and when I was coming, and vice versa. And so the other thing about the shift work that was great for us, as opposed to maybe somebody that works a 40-hour work week, is we had a lot of time to schedule stuff when I was off. And so a lot of those appointments and a lot of the things, Katie ended up having a C-section. And so we actually scheduled it around when I was going to be off work so that I didn't have to take as much time off. I was off. Yeah. I was off for 2 weeks after she had the baby, but we scheduled it. So it was actually over my 4 days. So I saved a couple of days of vacation and FMLA, to be able to do that.
No, that is awesome. I'm not looking forward to when he gets out and trying the whole 24-hour shifts and just learning to adjust to that, just because I am used to, responding from home, and this is what you do, and you go to calls when you have them, and that's it. So I know he's going to like it better, but we'll see how I deal with it with that. So now your kids are a little bit older. They're
Yep,
they're not
10 and 8.
So do you have anything in place now with the kids, with your wife, whatever? Like, do you have any sort of either structure to your days or a certain thing you do either certain days of the week or certain months, or I don't know, what's it kind of look like?
So for those of you that are listening that don't know, and I talk about it a lot on my podcast as well, but my wife's a first grade teacher. She's been an elementary school teacher our entire relationship. And so, well, she was in college to become one, and then she became one. So it's weird, man. And a lot of people probably won't get this, but I'm going to try and explain it the best I can. So Katie has the summers off. So during the summer, she usually goes back to Lincoln for about a month and spends, 4th of July time with her family. And I go up there over my 4 days when I can, because it's only like a 2.5, 3 hour drive. But I mean, we already know, like, if we look at the calendar and I know I'm going to be working on Christmas Eve or Christmas, I know they're going to go to Nebraska to be with family, and I'm going to stay here and work. And that's just something that we've accepted. The one thing that we really do still struggle with, she has a paper calendar on our fridge, and she writes everything. I mean, anything and everything you could ever imagine, it's written on that fridge. And I don't. And so there are so many times where I'm like, hey, babe, remember I'm going to teach in Oklahoma next weekend. And she's like, are you kidding me? She's like, did you look at the calendar? Aiden has 2 baseball games or 2 basketball games, and Leo has 2 football games, or whatever it is. And so we're still struggling with that, because there's a really hard, I don't want to say it's hard to keep track, because it's not. It's actually very simple. We're just both all over the place. And so the one thing that I will say is that it's kind of this chaotic ballet. And so, I've never left my kids at school. I've never gotten a phone call from the school like, hey, are you going to come pick up your kids? That has never happened, knock on wood. I've never forgotten to take them to a practice. So we try to spend as much quality time as we can. But especially right now, as they're getting older, it is split between sports. For Katie, it's conferences and after school stuff. For me, it's shifts and trainings and all that stuff. So that's the best way I can describe it, is it's like this chaotic ballet that somehow ends up being a beautiful masterpiece, but you have no idea how the hell it happened.
It's gotta be nice though, because I'm starting to see that you're starting to take your oldest son with you to some things, and it's gotta be really nice to be able to spend some different time with him too, though.
Yeah. And, so Aiden is very into the fire service. He told me very early on that he wanted to be a fireman. And I said, okay, that's great. The one thing that I probably don't have to explain it to people, but I feel like I do. I've never pushed the fire service on either one of my kids. If they ended up wanting to be something completely different, I'm fine with that. Leo is not at all interested in being a firefighter. He has no interest in it. And I'm cool with that, right? Like, I just want him to be successful. I want him to be happy, and I want him to be in a job where he can support himself and his family. But Aiden, on the other hand, is like through and through. I mean, the kid does searches in a blacked out SCBA mask upstairs all the time. And so, yeah, once he was old enough to start wanting to go to fire conferences with me, I think he's been to 3 so far. He's been down to Oklahoma and then out to the Bears of the Oath. And then he was up in Nebraska for one. And so, yeah, it's been cool. He really enjoys it. He gets to learn. And one of the big things that Katie was kind of scared of, I was pulling him out of school for some of this. And she goes, I just don't know how I feel about you pulling him out of school to go to these fire conferences. And I said, babe, as much as you don't know about the fire service, this is the one thing I will tell you. He is going to learn more in 4 days at a fire conference surrounded by a bunch of firefighters than he will ever learn in school.
It is very true.
Yeah. And he did.
Nothing else, the networking, the people skills, just a lot of that, not even getting to the technical side of any of the fire stuff, just the people aspect is things you can't replicate in school.
Absolutely. And so the first day, and I'm going to use Bears of the Oath because it just happened the other day. The first day of Bears of the Oath, he was very reserved. He was very quiet. Guys would come up, hey, buddy, what's your name? And he'd just kind of stare at him. By the second day, he was interacting with them and talking with them and asking questions. And by the third day, Justin Fraze, if he's listening from the colony, Justin had a conversation with Aiden, and I can't remember what he asked him, but Aiden turned around and he was like, yeah, you should probably know that because you're walking around like you own the place. And I was like, oh my God. Oh God, and Justin laughed and we had a good laugh about it. But I mean, Aiden really, they were flipping him crap and he was flipping it right back at him. And, so him being able to interact with guys that I look up to and guys that I've learned so much from, it's awesome, and so really, I mean, we're sitting at dinner and he's hanging out with Corley Moore and Justin Fraze and so many people that I can't, I'll probably forget somebody, but just the brother and sisterhood of the fire service is amazing for him.
I don't find offense if you say brotherhood, by the way. I don't know.
I mean, I use it synonymously. I mean,
okay.
sometimes I say brotherhood, sometimes, it's all the same.
We should start calling it sisterhood.
I whatever.
No, that is awesome. And it just made me really excited to see you taking one of your kids with you, just because just like that is what I hope someday I can do with a future child of mine. And I know this kid, it's not going to be on purpose, but I know they're going to be pushing it on them, but it's because I'm so into it at the moment. Chris is going to be so into it. We almost won't have a choice sometimes, but it's so exciting because I see some of these other people who bring their kids to these conferences and they're able to have these interactions with these firefighters from all across the country and get to meet so many people. And it's, I don't know, it's just, that is something I very much look forward to, and spending more time with my family, but with something I love doing, being able to share it with them.
No, absolutely. And we're all in it together. And the funny thing is everybody has different experiences. Everybody has different thought processes on things. When we were down at the conference that Corley Moore put on, the Honor the Fallen conference down in Moore, Oklahoma, Aiden went down there with me for that one. And during the conference, it was the lecture stuff. And let's be honest, he's 10. He'd rather be playing Fortnite or something than sitting in a lecture hall listening to lectures. I mean, he was into the whole like hands-on stuff, but one of the battalion chiefs came up to me from Moore and he was like, "Hey man, I don't know if you're interested, but my kids are about your son's age and they're at home today. My wife's there. She said that she'd be more than happy to watch Aiden if he wants to come over and hang out and play video games for a couple hours while we're doing the lecture stuff." And I was like, yeah, that'd be cool. And so I asked him and he was super excited about it. And so he actually ended up getting a ride in the battalion chief's car back to his house, which was only like 5 minutes away. And he got to hang out. And so, that battalion chief's wife taking the time to hear that I had my son at the conference and knowing that he's 10 and he probably doesn't want to sit there for the next 5 hours and listen to lectures. She opened her doors to us. And I am eternally grateful for that. I mean, it was just so awesome. But that's the fire service. The same thing could happen anywhere.
Yeah. Oh, that is so cool. Well, we could pretty much keep talking for forever. I think we've pretty much been talking for forever. I think it's about an hour and a half now. Yeah. A little over, something like that. Hour and a half that we've been recording, probably more like
2.5 hours.
2.5 that we've actually been talking. And I know you have other things that you need to do today. But so I know you have a class coming up in Nebraska.
Shameless plug. No problem with that. So we're actually doing the short staffed fireground class up in Osceola. So for those of you who are listening who aren't from Nebraska, this is in central Nebraska. It's just kind of in between Lincoln and Grand Island ish. And so the closest town that has hotels is York, which is about 30 minutes away. But there is a diamond in the rough. Osceola has a training tower that is amazing. It's all Class A. It has 3 stories with a full roof prop. It has an elevator shaft. It's got like everything you could ever think of. And it was all built by the department, by the fire chief and his sons and some other people that helped. So it is an amazing training facility. We love going up there. It's actually Logan Watts's department, and they have been gracious enough to kind of give us full access if we want to come up there in 2 classes. So November 13th, we're going to be doing the short staffed fireground. It's going to cover truck work, engine work, and incident command. And we're going to run 3 and 4 person scenarios where you're going to have 3 or 4 people for the first 15 minutes, and it's all going to be live fire. There's going to be victims. There's going to be all sorts of things thrown in the mix. but it's more realistic and more indicative of kind of the fire service in a lot of people's areas. It's not just unique to Nebraska or Kansas or Iowa. But anybody is more than welcome. If you go to our Facebook page, Valor Fire Training, you can go to the Eventbrite link and sign up. Food's included. So when you're there, you're going to get fed breakfast, lunch, and probably some sort of dinner. I'm not really sure how that's going to work, but it's going to be a full like 10 to 12 hour day. So it'll be awesome. It's going to be a lot of fun.
All right. Well, I'm going to make you plug another one because I was interested to hear about this, the Oz.
Yeah.
one.
So Burning Oz Fire Conference is going to be great. So we are doing that. It's January 4th, 5th, and 6th, I believe, in Lawrence, Kansas. So we're bringing in, so it's Todd Edwards with Fire Life Training, and his cadre are going to be doing the engine company stuff. Valor Fire Training is going to be running the truck company ops. So we have a couple firefighters from the metro departments that work on truck companies and have, anywhere between 10 and 20 years of experience on trucks. And then Jake Hoffman from Squad 5 is going to be coming in to do extrication and rescue training. And it's going to be a great, so the first day is going to be lecture. And we actually have the lead center rented out. So the lecturers are going to be myself, Todd Edwards, Jake Hoffman, and we have Clyde Gordon coming in from Houston. He's going to be one of our lecturers. And then day 2 and 3 are going to be hot. So again, Lawrence, Kansas, if you haven't been there, it's pretty legit. I mean, there's the mass street effect. So you have a whole street of nothing but bars. So firefighters will be right at home. And everything's going to be held pretty local. We're utilizing one of the fire districts that surrounds Lawrence. We're going to use their training center. And they've been gracious enough to host us. So it'll be really fun. It's in January. I know it's going to be cold, but fires don't stop burning just because it's cold out.
Well, it's going to be nice to have something else added to the list of conferences in the Midwest.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's an every year thing, fingers crossed.
So you want the answer. So I'm going to throw it out there. Our hope is that this is going to be a reoccurring thing. We didn't do it on purpose. This actually was scheduled for 2021. And we couldn't get things done in time because of the resurgence of COVID. And so we settled on the 4th, 5th, and 6th. And what we didn't realize at the time is that we're actually going to be the first fire conference in 2022 anywhere in the country.
That's awesome.
And so our goal is from now on, that's going to be our claim to fame, unless somebody wants to pick up the 1st through the 4th. We're going to be the first fire conference every year. So we're hoping to set the tone for the country for fire training conferences and kind of keep rolling with it.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it was totally done on accident, but it seems really cool.
No, I can't go for this year for it. But I'm hoping next year, 2023, since it is every year occurring. So that'll be awesome.
And one thing that I want to plug also, because you brought up the family aspect of it. So for the Burning Oz conference, one of the things that's really unique that you don't see a lot of other places is that the Fire Wife Life, which is Todd's wife and a bunch of other firefighter spouses, they put on a program. It is not just for wives. So I've made this comment several times. It could be boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, partners, doesn't matter, right? But they are going to do a separate kind of mini conference in tandem with ours. And it is all about, some of the struggles that you deal with as a spouse of a firefighter. And then one of the nights, I believe it's the second night, they're going to do the fire family. So kids are invited. They're going to be able to come up and have dinner. And we're going to discuss kind of all the aspects of being a child of a firefighter and some of the struggles that the kids have and how to deal with it. And it's going to be really interactive. I think it's going to be awesome. And to my knowledge, I don't know of really any other conferences that are doing something like that.
I haven't heard of that. If I've heard of anything, it's just they kind of get the spouses together, but it's not for that long of a time. And they don't get that in depth, especially with the kids. And that is so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. When they brought it up, and I knew that they had been doing it for a while at some of the other conferences that they do, that they host, it was a no-brainer because here in the Midwest, we just don't have that aspect. We don't involve the families like they do in a lot of other places around the country.
Mm-hmm. No, I can't wait. That'll be really exciting to be able to be a part of for you. And I can't wait to see it sometime. So that's awesome. Last one I'm going to plug is Les Lucard again. even though we said the name probably like 10 or so times, actually more than 10 times, probably about 100 times by now. But we have the 2022 Les Luker Conference coming up in Kearney, Nebraska, February 4th through the 6th. And Dave, you're going to be teaching a couple classes up there.
I am.
Should be good.
I'm excited to be back.
It's going to be really fun. So join us up there in Kearney. Let's see, it's 3-day conference. We'll have a hot class offering and some classroom sessions. We are releasing the class list. I don't know if it'll be out by the time this comes out or not, but take a look on their Facebook pages and stuff for that. But anyways, Dave, it was really great having you on. If people want to find you, how do they find you?
Yeah, so they can hit us up on Facebook, Valor Fire Training. We have Instagram and LinkedIn and all the normal stuff. But one of the more recent ones, and I can thank my 10-year-old son for this. We actually just started a TikTok account.
Whoa.
Yeah, right. Like I'm big time in it now. So we have the TikTok, but it's all going to be tied in together. So a lot of the media that we put out on TikTok is going to be on our YouTube channel. It's also going to be on Facebook. So pretty much any major social media platform. Our podcasts are available on all major platforms. So Apple, Google, all the same stuff that you have them on.
Mm-hmm.
But if you type in Valor Fire Training, that should be able to find us. And then you can always send a message to david@valorfiretraining.com if you want more information or want to chat about training.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been a blast, and I would keep talking to you all day if we could.
We'll just have to have part 2.
Part 2. Get into everything else. I don't know. Get into solving the all the issues of the fire service.
Absolutely. No, it was a blast. I appreciate you having me on. It was long overdue.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming by and listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a rating and review wherever you're listening. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram @Couplings Fire Podcast. See you next time, everybody.